Hi, welcome back to our Read Aloud with Dr. Cronky. And we're reading Refugee. Alan Gratz is the author. We are going to start with Mahmoud. He is heading into Macedonia. He was on a train and then heading to Serbia. It's 2015, so present day, about 14 to 15 days from home. Mahmoud felt like he was back in Syria. Policemen with guns guarded the border from Greece into Macedonia, and he felt dirty again, unwanted, illegal. Even without travel papers, Mahmoud and his family had been able to exchange their Syrian pounds for euros and buy train tickets from Athens to Thessalonica and from there to a little Greek town near the border of Macedonia. Now they were headed for the Macedonian town of Javigilia, where they hoped to catch a train north to Serbia and from there to Hungary. But first, they had to find a way to sneak across the border. Mahmoud pointed out a little tangle of tents and laundry lines just off the gravel road, and Mahmoud's father pulled them into the camp to plan their next move. It was another little refugee village, the kind of makeshift town Mahmoud had seen again and again on the road out of Syria. Mahmoud and his father hunkered down behind a trash barrel and watched the border crossing. The Macedonian police weren't turning people away, but they might be checking papers, and Mahmoud's family hadn't waited in Athens for official travel permits. Mahmoud's dad pulled out his iPhone and consulted the map. This whole area is farmland, his father said. Flat land, too easy to be caught. He scrolled sideways on the map, and Mahmoud leaned in closer. It looks like there's a forest here to the west, Dad said. They can't have every meter of the border guarded. We'll slip through at night. Once we're in Macedonia, we'll be all right. Where's your mother? Mahmoud looked up. Mom was where she always was, working her way through the tents looking for Hannah. Hannah wasn't there, though, and she wasn't at any of the other little clusters of refugee tents they passed as they hiked farther into the countryside. At some place, he'd picked up the map on his iPhone. Mahmoud's father led them off a dirt road into a dark forest. It was late, well after midnight, and Mahmoud was weary from walking, but they still had 2 hours to walk to the Macedonian border. Walid raised his arms to be carried, and Dad hefted him up against his shoulder. Mahmoud bristled. Walid was being a baby. He was too big to be carried, and Mahmoud was tired too, but nobody was carrying him. They walked along in silence, their way lit only by the occasional glow of the phone screen as Dad checked their position. The forest was full of tall pine trees that crowded almost everything else out, and the ground was covered with brown pine needles that smelled like a car freshener. Somewhere in the forest an owl screeched, and Mahmoud heard the scurrying of small animals. Every rustle made Mahmoud jump. Every scuffle gave him goosebumps. He was a city boy and used to the lights and sounds of traffic. Here, every sound was like a gunshot in the unearthly dark and quiet. It terrified Mahmoud. At last, they emerged from the dark woods and found the train station. It was a small 2-story mustard-colored building with a burgundy roof and rounded gables. It was also packed with people. Hundreds of people slept outside, using their backpacks and trash bags as pillows. They filled the train platform and the sidewalks in front of the station, and some even slept between the tracks. Plastic bottles and empty bags and discarded wrappers littered the ground. Mahmoud watched his father's shoulders sag. Mahmoud felt the same way, but when his father stood taller and hiked Walid up higher on his shoulder, "Hey, at least we know we're on the right track," he said. He grinned at Mahmoud. "The right track, get it?" Mahmoud got it. He just didn't think any of this was funny. "No, nothing?" his father said. "I guess I need to train you better." Mahmoud still didn't laugh. He was just too tired. Mahmoud's mother had already left them, stepping carefully among the sleeping refugees like a ghost, searching for Hannah. "The train station looks closed," Mahmoud's father told him. "We'll have to find some place to sleep. We'll come back in the morning and see if we can buy tickets." They found a nearby hotel listed in TripAdvisor, and they collected Mahmoud's mother and set out for the inn on foot. Mahmoud couldn't wait to climb into a real bed. He felt like he could sleep for days. A car came up behind them, and this time Mahmoud didn't jump out in front of it, but it slowed down and stopped beside them anyway. "You need a taxi?" the man said in broken Arabic. No, Mahmoud's father said. We're just going to the hotel. Hotel, much money, the man said. You go to Serbia, I take you in taxi. 25 euros each. Mahmoud did the math. 100 euros was a lot of money, almost 24,000 Syrian pounds. But a taxi ride straight to Serbia without spending the night or longer in Macedonia? Mahmoud's parents huddled together and Mahmoud listened in. Train tickets were likely cheaper, and Mahmoud worried about accepting a ride from a strange man in a country they didn't know. But Dad argued that there wasn't another train until at least tomorrow, and there were already so many people waiting for that train in the station. We're all tired, and the taxi gets us closer to Germany. Sleeping on the ground doesn't, Mahmoud threw in. That's the deciding vote, then, Dad said. We'll take the car. It was a good decision. 2 hours and 100 euros later, they were at the Serbian border. It was still dark, but there were no border guards where the driver dropped them off. No roads either. Mahmoud had slept a little in the car, but he felt like a zombie as he shambled with his family along the railroad tracks that would take them across the border from Macedonia to the nearest Serbian town. Since they were traveling, they were permitted to skip their early morning prayers. They staggered into a town just after sunup. Mahmoud thought that if he didn't lie down somewhere and sleep, he would pass out on his feet and fall flat on his face. But there were even more refugees at this train station than there were in Macedonia. And here there were no tents and no hotel rooms. People slept on the platform of the station or outside in the fields. There were no toilets either, and no markets or restaurants. What little the local Serbs had, they were charging a fortune for. One man was selling water bottles for 5 euros apiece. A group of men sat around a power strip, charging their phones as though they were huddled around a campfire. Mahmoud had seen scenes like this everywhere along the routes from Athens to Germany. He and his family paused just long enough to recharge their own phones again, and then they were on the move once more. Mahmoud was so tired and he wanted to cry. His father found them a bus to Belgrade, and Mahmoud was thankful for the few hours of sleep, uncomfortable though they were. It was almost sundown when they arrived in the Serbian capital, but they still couldn't stop. The police there were raiding hotels for illegal refugees, so Dad found yet another taxi driver who promised to take them the 2 hours farther to the Hungarian border. Taxis were expensive, but so was trying to stay overnight in a city that didn't want you. The silver four-door Volkswagen was driven by a middle-aged, olive-skinned Serbian man with neatly trimmed black beard. He promised to get them to Hungary and keep them from the police for 30 euros apiece, more than it had cost them to cross all of Macedonia. It was a tight fit in the car, with Mahmoud, his mother, and his father crammed into the back seat and Walid on his father's lap. This new driver seemed to find every rut and hole in the road and send them flying into each other, but none of that mattered to Mahmoud. He was asleep almost as soon as he closed his eyes, and he only woke again when he realized the car wasn't moving. Had it really gone already 2 hours? He felt like he had just gone to sleep. Mahmoud's eyelids fluttered, and he looked out the windows. He expected to see the lights of the Serbian bordered town, another tent city. Instead, they were stopped in the middle of a lonely stretch of highway surrounded by dark, empty fields, and the taxi driver was leaning over the back seat with a pistol aimed straight at them. Gosh, this family cannot get a break. Joseph, off the American coast, 1939, 21 days from home. So remember that Captain Schroeder's looking for a place in America along the coastline that will take them. Miami. They weren't even a day out of Havana, and already the St. Louis was passing the American city. It was so close you could see it from the ship without binoculars. Joseph and Ruthie hung over the rails like everyone else, pointing out hotels and houses and parks. Joseph saw highways and white square office buildings, skyscrapers, and hundreds of little boats at harbor. Why couldn't they just pull in Miami and dock there? Why wouldn't the United States just let them in? There was so much land that didn't have buildings on it, miles and miles with palm trees and swamp as far as they could see. Joseph would take it. He would live there. He would live anywhere so long as it was away from the Nazis. An airplane circled the ship, its propeller buzzing like a hornet. Newspaper photographers, one of the other passengers, guessed out loud. Joseph knew by now that the St. Louis was big news the world over. Newsreel camera crews had followed the ship out of the Havana harbor on little boats, yelling at the same question at all the passengers. Where would they land? Who would take the Jewish refugees? Would they end up back in Germany? That afternoon, as the U.S. Coast Guard cutter cruised alongside the St. Louis, its officers watching them through binoculars. One of the other children guessed the cutter was there to protect them, to pick anyone up who jumped overboard. Joseph thought it was to make sure that the St. Louis didn't steer for Miami. Some of the children, like Ruthie, still played games and swam in the pool, and they were close enough to America for some of the teenagers to pick up New York Yankees game on the radios. But most of the adults walked around like they were at a funeral. The happy mood of the voyage to Cuba was gone forever. People spoke little and socialized less. The movie theater was deserted, and no one went to the dance hall, except for Joseph's mother. 4 days she had mourned Joseph's father and had become Joseph's father by locking herself in their cabin. But with the announcement that the St. Louis was leaving Cuba, leaving without her husband, something in her flipped like a light switch. She cleaned herself up, put on her makeup, did her hair, dumped the contents of their suitcase on her bed, put on her favorite party dress, and went straight to the dance hall. She'd been there ever since. Joseph's mother was dancing by herself when he went in to find her. A paper moon and stars were still hung from the ceiling, decorations left over from the party when they all thought they'd be leaving the ship for Cuba. Joseph's mother saw him in the doorway and hurried over to him. She pulled Joseph with her onto the dance floor. "Dance with me, Joseph," she said. She took his hands in hers and led him in a waltz. "We didn't pay for all those dance lessons for nothing." The dance lessons had been a lifetime ago, back before Hitler, back when his parents thought Joseph would be going to dances as a teenager, not running from the Nazis. "No," Joseph said. He was too old to dance with his mother, too embarrassed. And there were more important things to think about right now. "What's going on, Mama? Why are you doing this? It's like you're happy Papa's gone." She twirled in his arms. "Did I ever tell you why you were named Joseph?" she asked. No. "You're named after my older brother." "I didn't know you had a brother." Joseph's mother danced like her life depended on it. "Joseph died in the Great War. My brother, Joseph, at the Battle of Somme in France." Joseph didn't know what to say. His mother had never talked about her brother before. His uncle, he realized. He would have had an uncle. "You can live life as a ghost, waiting for death to come, or you can dance," she told him. "Do you understand?" "No," Joseph said. The song ended and Joseph's mother took his face in both hands. "You look just like him," she said. Joseph didn't know what to say. His mother had never talked about her brother before. His uncle, he realized. He would have had an uncle. "You can live life as a ghost, waiting for death to come, or you can dance," she told him. "Do you understand?" "No," said Joseph. The song ended and Joseph's mother took his face in both her hands. "You look just like him," she said. Joseph didn't know what to say to that. "I'm sorry for the interruption," the band leader said, "but I've just been told there will be a special announcement in the A-Deck social hall." Joseph's mother pouted because the music had stopped, but Joseph knew it was worse than that. He wouldn't have said why. He couldn't have said why. But he was sure, deep down in the pit of the stomach, this would be only bad news, the worst. His mother took his hand and squeezed it. "Come on," she said with a smile. The social hall was already full when they got there. In the front of the room, under this giant portrait of Adolf Hitler, stood a committee of passengers who had been working with the captain on a solution to their problem. From the looks on their faces, they had not come up with one. When the head of the committee spoke, he confirmed all of Joseph's worst fears. "The United States has refused us. We are heading back to Europe." The outburst was instantaneous. Cries, gasps, tears. Joseph cursed, the first time he had ever cursed in front of his mother. She didn't react at all, and it made Joseph feel both a little ashamed and a little bolder at the same time. "You mean we're going back to Germany?" someone yelled. "Not necessarily," a committee member said, "but we must stay calm." Calm? Joseph thought. Was this man insane? Calm? How can we stay calm? a man asked out loud, echoing Joseph's thoughts. The man's name was Posner. Joseph had seen him before on the ship. A lot of us were in concentration camps, Posner went on. His face was twisted in anger, and he spat his words. We were released only on condition that we leave Germany immediately. For us to return means one thing, going back to those camps. That could be the future of every man, woman, and child on this ship. We will not die. We won't return. We will not die, the crowd chanted. Out of the corner of his eye, Joseph saw Otto Schindig lingering in the doorway. Schindig grinned at the panic in the room, and Joseph felt his blood begin to boil. Ladies and gentlemen, said the head of the committee, the news is bad. That we realize, but Europe is still many days away. That gives us and all our friends time to make new attempts to help us. Joseph's mother pulled him away. Come, Joseph, somebody will think of something. Let's dance. Joseph didn't understand why his mother wasn't upset, why she suddenly didn't seem to care anymore. They were only to be taken back to Germany, back to their deaths. Joseph let his mother pull him to the door, then broke away. No, Mama, I can't. She smiled sadly at him and ducked past Otto Schindig, who leaned against the doorframe. You should do as your mother says, boy, Schindig said. These are your last free days. Enjoy them. When you go back to Hamburg, nobody will ever hear from you again. Joseph went back to the yelling passengers, his anger rising like the tide. There had to be something they could do, something he could do. The passenger who'd spoken up, Posner, pulled him aside. You are Aaron Landau's son. Joseph, yes? I'm sorry about your father, he said. Joseph was tired of hearing people's condolences. Yes, thank you, he said, trying to move on. The man grabbed his arm. You were among the children who went to the engine room in the bridge, yes? Joseph frowned. What was this about? And you're a man now. You had your bar mitzvah and the first Shabbos on the ship. Joseph stood taller, and the man let go of his arm. What of it? Joseph asked. The man looked around to make sure no one else was listening. There's a group of us who are going to storm the bridge and take hostages, he whispered. Force the captain to run the ship aground on the American coast. Joseph couldn't believe what he was hearing. He shook his head. It'll never work, Joseph said. He'd seen how many crew there really were on the ship and what a lot of them below the decks really thought about the Jews. They wouldn't go down without a fight, and they knew this ship better than any passenger. Posner shrugged. What choice do we have? We can't go back. Your father knew that. That's why he did what he did. If we succeed, we're free. If we fail, at least the world will realize how desperate we were. Joseph looked to the floor. If they failed, when they failed, the captain would take the ship back to Germany, and then Posner and the rest of the hijackers were for sure to be sent to concentration camps. Why are you telling me this? Joseph said. Because we need you with us, Posner told him. We need you to show us the way up to the bridge. Wow. Okay. One more chapter we'll have with Isabel. And she is off the coast of Florida, 1994, 5 days from home. Miami. It was like a dream, like a glittering vision of heaven, as if Ivan had opened the gates for them. Everyone stared, stunned, as though they had never thought they would ever actually see it. When the lights on the horizon became the faint shapes of buildings and roads and trees, they knew for sure they were looking at Miami. They cried and hugged each other again. Isabel cried again for Ivan. Cried because he had been so close and hadn't made it. But her tears for him were mixed with relief that she would make it to the States, and that made her feel guilty and even cry harder. How could she be sad for Ivan and happy for herself all at the same time? Crunk! Something bent and broke under Poppy's foot, and the boat lurched. Water streamed in from a new crack in the hull, and suddenly all feelings of relief ended. The boat was sinking. No! Poppy cried. He dove to try to shore up the hole, but there was nothing he could do. The weight of the ship and its passengers was pulling it apart at last. They all scrambled to the front of the boat, but the back end sank deeper and deeper under the weight of the heavy engine. The top of the hull was almost to the waterline at the back. When the two met, the ocean would flood in over the side, and there would be no going back. They would drown, or end up like Ivan. Terror rose in Isabel like the water filling the boat. She couldn't drown, couldn't disappear beneath the waves like Lita, like Ivan. No, no! Bail! Her grandfather cried. Miami was lying in the Mommy was lying in the prow of the boat, as far away from the rising water as possible, her breath coming harder and shorter now. But everyone else dove for their cups and jugs. It wasn't going to be enough, though. Isabel could see that. There was way too much water, too much weight. The engine, Isabel suddenly remembered. The way it had been working itself loose from its bolts, she threw herself at it, trying to knock it loose. When she couldn't wrench it free by hand, she wedged herself in between it and the next bench, down in the water, and kicked it with her feet. "Chabela, leave the engine alone and help us bail," her father called. Isabel ignored him and kicked. If she could just get the engine free. Another foot joined hers. Amara, she understood. Together they kicked at the engine until Isabel finally felt the wet wood under the bolts give. The engine tumbled to the bottom of the boat, covering up Fidel Castro's commandant face to them. Fight against the impossible and win, Isabel thought. 1, 2, 3, Amara said, and together she and Isabel rolled the motorcycle engine up the side and almost over until Isabel slipped and it rolled back down with a splash into the water inside the boat. Again, Amara told her. 1, 2, 3. Up, up, up they rolled the engine and onto the top of the side where it pushed the hull down below the surface of the sea. Water gushed in and Isabel felt the boat sinking under her feet, pulling it with it down into the black depths, down with Ivan and the sharks. "No, wait!" Senor Castillo cried. And with one last good push, Isabel and Amara tipped the engine over the side. It slipped into the water with a slurp and dropped like a stone, and the back end of the boat shot back up out of the water, the weight of the engine no longer dragging it down. "What have you done?" Senor Castillo cried. "Now we'll never make it to shore." "Well, we weren't going to make it if we sank," Amara told him. "Well, we'll row," Lito said. "When we're close enough in, the tide will take us to the rest of the way. Or we'll swim." "Swim?" Isabel worried. "Well, what about the sharks?" "Just bail. We won't be doing anything if we don't bail," Luis cried. "Bail! Weep! Weep!" An electronic siren made them all jump, and a red swirling light came on a few hundred meters to their left. A person speaking English said something over a bullhorn, and Isabel didn't quite understand. From the confused looks on everybody's faces in the boat, they didn't either. Then the same voice repeated the message in Spanish. "Halt! This is the United States Coast Guard. You are in violation of U.S. waters. Remain where you are and prepare to be boarded." All right, you guys, hope you had a great day today. Hope you're doing your lessons and checking in with your teachers and making every day count, because Grizzlies, we have a lot of learning left to do for the remainder of the year. I know we won't be together, and that does make me sad, but I want you to be the best prepared Grizzly you can be for 7th grade. So continue doing your lessons and make the day count. And it's a great day to be a Grizzly.